Could you explain further, like expand on what he was meaning by that? But that keep you from having religious experiences?
Well, if everybody goes their own enlightened way, let's say, there's no social cohesion. There's no unity of purpose. There's nothing but fragmentation. And part of the danger of the hippie movement in the 1960s was a counter-social fragmentation.
Right.
Now, so you can imagine, things get so constrained that everybody's exactly the same, and that's a complete totalitarian catastrophe. But you can imagine the opposite catastrophe, which is that, well, everyone's letting it all hang out and doing their own thing, and that's equally dangerous.
Right.
And so there's some balance in the middle. Well, that's that balance between chaos and order that we were referring to earlier.
It's also an ignorance of the structure that's involved in maintaining a society.
Definitely.
You need discipline, and people need to work to maintain the society that you enjoy, to be so free and to be a hippie.
Well, you can imagine that complex social order can be maintained by something like mindless obedience.
Right.
But that's suboptimal. What you'd really want is enlightened responsibility.
Right.
Now,
right. That's a great way to put it.
Right. That's a very hard thing to pull off, though, because it means that you have to leap out of the box of social constraint, and you have to take the responsibility onto yourself. Now, that's a hell of a lot better if you can manage it, but that is definitely not what Kesey or Leary, for example, were preaching to the masses.
Is like an admirable thing that people just should aspire to.
It's the best possible. Okay,
yes, the highest goal.
Let me give you another example of this, if you don't mind. I'm going to use another biblical story.
While you were biblicaling, the lights are flickering behind you, almost like God is interacting with us. There's spirits in the room, Jamie. Have you noticed the light flickering? You haven't noticed it? Keep an eye on it.
Hopefully they're the right spirits.
Well, I think they always are.
Yeah. Well, so in the story of Abraham is he's an old man when the story starts.
As soon as you start talking about Abraham, start flickering again. It's going out, see?
It's one of my tricks, man.
I'm telling you, dude, it's never happened before. This is wild.
So Abraham is like 70 years old when the story starts, and we don't know anything about him. He's completely nondescript. He's a case of failure to launch. So he has rich parents, and he has everything he needs at hand. So he can live the life of a satiated infant. He's in the throes of what would you say, materialistic plenty. Okay, and the voice of God comes to him. Now, but it's characterized in a very particular manner. So God comes to Abraham as the call to adventure. And that's a very useful thing to know. So in the Moses story, God comes to Moses as that which attracts his interest and takes him off the beaten path. In the story of Abraham, God comes as a spirit of adventure. And God makes Abraham a deal. It's a very specific deal, and it's the best possible deal. This is the covenant, by the way. This is the covenant. So God tells Abraham, if you leave your zone of comfort, if you remove yourself from your father's tent, if you move away from infantile materialistic satiation and go out into the terrible world, and you do that voluntarily, you have the adventure of your life, this is what will happen. You'll be a blessing to yourself that's genuine. So instead of being racked with self-doubt and being self-conscious and taking yourself apart with guilt and shame, you'll ride the wave of adventure and you'll feel that your life is a blessing. Not only will you feel that, it will be a blessing. That's the first thing that will happen. The second thing will happen is that other people will notice and your name will become renowned, and that will be valid. You'll be a blessing to other people in that regard. Your name will be upheld. So you'll stand out among your peers, but in a justifiable manner that's a consequence of your own intrinsic merit. The third thing that'll happen is that you'll have the opportunity to establish something permanent. For Abraham, it's a dynasty, right? He's offered the possibility of being the father of nations. And the fourth thing that happens is you'll do it in a way that's of cardinal benefit to everyone. And so what happens in that story, this is so cool, it's so remarkable. It's the answer to the selfish gene, by the way, as well. So what this story does is it takes the call to adventure, which is the instinct that makes children move out into the world. It's the spirit that you encourage if you're a good father. It lines that up and it says, if you follow that and let it pull you out of your zone of comfort, your life will be a blessing to you. Your reputation will grow. You'll establish something permanent, and you'll do that in a way that's good for everyone, right? So that's a hell of a good deal. And that's That's the story of Abraham. Okay, so why is that relevant to the psychedelic debate? Because if you're going to move into the zone of the transcendent, you have to take on the requisite responsibility, or the process of transcendence turns into something like a descent into unstructured chaos. And that's not an improvement. It's just a movement from tyranny into the desert. That's a good way of thinking about it symbolically. So what happens in the Exodus story, because it also details out how this should be structured, is that Moses has a vision of individual responsibility and social organization that's maximally responsibility-based. So Moses tells the Pharaoh to let his people go, but that's not the phrase. The phrase is, God tells Moses to say this. He's, let my people go so they may worship me in the desert. And so you move out of the tyranny. That's what happens, let's say, in the throes of a psychedelic experience, is that the preconceptions are shattered. Now you're somewhere unstructured. Okay, well, you can't worship what's unstructured. You have to find the proper structuring for your new freedom. The vision that's put forward in the book of Exodus is a vision of multidimensional, responsible identity. So you take on responsibility for your own life. You take on responsibility for the life of your wife or your husband. You take on responsibility for your family. You're a model for your community. You serve your state. You do what you can for your nation, and that's all united under your highest upward orientation. And that's ordered freedom. That's ordered freedom.